This is the gospel of Jesus Christ according to Matthew, the 11th chapter. When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have good news brought to them, and blessed is anyone who takes no defense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal places. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." This is the gospel of our Lord. What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? That's where John was. He was in the wilderness, and people seemed shocked to find out he was a bit rough around the edges. He had removed himself from all the comforts of the royal places, and people were still put off when they met with him to find out that he wouldn't eat and drink with them in celebration. It was the same confusion people experienced when they met Jesus at a feast table and saw that he was both eating and drinking. Neither was what they had expected, and that's a bit of a problem. It's one that Jesus addresses almost immediately following today's reading. Jesus says, "John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, 'Look, a glutton and a drunkard.'" You see, if neither is acceptable, then what is? In other words, what did you go out into the wilderness to look at? Do you really even know what you're looking for? Here's a better question. Do we really know? Advent is a time of watching and waiting. Do we know what we're watching and waiting for? If Jesus were to sit in a pew next to us, would we recognize it? Do we know what we're looking for? Or like the crowds around Jesus, do we just have a long list of what we're not looking for? Jesus wouldn't be crude or boisterous. Jesus wouldn't dress in Gucci and drive a Maserati. Jesus wouldn't be filled with anger and rage. And he wouldn't be broken down in depression, would he? Well, what would he be? Almost anything you say, it's easy for someone else to contradict. He would be kind. Well, would he extend that kindness to those who would use it to harm others? Would he be gentle in the face of oppression? It's very easy to point to almost any act in this world and say, that's why it's not Christ-like. It's a lot harder, much more difficult to look at the brokenness of this world and find Christ. What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? If you go into the wilderness, you'll find a wild man. If you go to the palace, you'll find one in soft robes. What else do we expect to find in these places? Here's what I suggest we work on this Advent. Rather than honing our vision to point our fingers and say what is wrong, let's practice seeing the prophet and the coming Christ in both the soft robes and the wild aesthetic. That doesn't mean we need to accept all things. The world is still broken. There is still sin and oppression that must be stood up against, but it does mean we're able to look for Christ in all the places. In the bar rooms and parties of the common folk, I bet Christ just might be a bit crude and a bit boisterous. Jesus hung out with sinners and tax collectors, and they invited him back. He was able to fit in. The Christ might be dressed like a fashionista by the runways of New York and Milan. The Christ can raise a fist in righteous anger when the oppressed demand freedom and where anyone grieves. Christ is always bowed down with them in lament. Wherever it is we're looking is a chance of finding Jesus there. That's Advent hope. And the thing about Advent hope is we're supposed to actually anticipate finding Jesus there. Look in the places we're told Jesus couldn't be and expect to find Jesus there. And we can expect him to be behaving like you'd expect someone to behave there. In the wilderness, the prophet is wild. At the feast table, the Son of Man eats and drinks. Here in worship, we find Jesus in bread and wine and prayer and song, but on the factory floor, it's a bit different. Jesus is still there. Jesus can be found anywhere, which doesn't make our gathered worship pointless. That's the point of gathering in worship. We don't come into our sanctuaries because they're the only place that God can be found. We come here to learn to see God so that we can see God everywhere else. If there's one gift that I pray the people who join with me for the Mass receive, it's this. I pray that finding Jesus in bread and wine helps them find Jesus in their neighbor. I hope they're able to look at the broken wretchedness of this world and still see the light of Christ emanating from its core. See, that ability, that's part of what we're watching and looking for. That's something I would call Christ-like. That's one of the predominant markers of discipleship I look for, the ability to see at the exact same time the profound needs of this world and its shining possibility of what it can be. People of Advent hope should be able to watch for Christ, the love of the world, without denying the reality of pain and harm. We should be able to look the cruelty of the world right in the face and not lose faith in the goodness and love of our neighbors. When John sent his disciples to ask Jesus if he was the one, Jesus didn't say yes. He didn't say, "That is me, come and follow." He said, "Go tell John what you hear and what you see," because you've already seen the proof. And that's in a world where Rome was still in charge, where children still died, and John was about to be beheaded. Jesus said, "You have already seen." For those of you in the hecticness of the season or in greater traumas of life, for those of you that have forgotten what it is we come to look at, for those of you who are wondering, how will we recognize Christ in this world? The answer is the same one Jesus gave to them. You have seen and heard it. Not just in the reading of scriptures and the telling of the story. You see, the world doesn't always look like it. In John's time, John's disciples saw John in jail, the leaders doing nothing about it. But it was true for them, they had seen it. Our world is still in need of healing, a healing we are often called to be part of giving. And yet we see it. Look around. Open your eyes and your ears to what's right in front of you. Not the messages to tell you how bad the world has become. Look around in front of you. Every day. There they are. good people. You'll see them if you look. Sometimes, actually most of the time, they're the exact same wicked and broken people that you encounter with different eyes. Advent hope tells us we will find Christ there. And then we will go and say what it is we hear and see, because it's still true.